The Awakening of Joel Singer by Scott McCaffrey. Narrated by Luke Welland. Part 3. Meet Your Maker. Please like and subscribe. Demetrius now sat with Robert and Ron in Robert's home office. It didn't have the opulence of his office at NoTech's headquarters, but it did have access to the same computer files, including the files about their mysterious benefactor. "We've got to find this guy. No more fucking around," Robert said. "In this box is a pill that will cure paralysis. It actually allows the body to repair severed spinal cords. Do you know what that means?" He didn't wait for an answer. "It means that he's managed to overcome the body's own self-imposed limitations. He had to do that to allow for the repair of the spinal cord." "Why was that necessary?" Demetrius asked. "Because the body generates a bramble, a barrier to prevent repair from happening normally," Robert responded. "The body actually produces a chemical called no-go that prevents the repair of the spinal cord." "Why would the body do that?" Ron asked. "Because allowing the body to repair the spinal cord, actively maintaining that ability, takes up resources," Robert cryptically responded. Demetrius started to ask, "Why would—" Robert waved off the question. "Demetrius, what have we ascertained about that crusader that is seemingly stopping criminals with exotic animals? Is he connected to our mysterious benefactor? I think they're one and the same, but I can't put my finger on why," Robert said. "Sir, we don't know much about either one. No one knows where he lives, how he makes these beasts, or becomes them, if such stories are true, or what motivates him. Now that we have our devices reactivated and the new ones in place, we hear the police have scoured every house, apartment, and rat hole in the Bronx for word of him." Robert appeared lost in thought. "They've looked in every rat hole, huh?" he muttered. "That was a metaphor," Demetrius said. "Yes, and like all good metaphors, it makes an important point," Robert responded. "What point is that?" Ron asked. "Even a rat wouldn't want to shit in its own rat hole." Demetrius and Ron were both perplexed, but Ron only for a moment. "In other words," Ron interjected, "the Bronx might be the last place the man lives." Dr. Harrington nodded. "If I had to guess, I'd say he lives somewhere close enough to travel back and forth in one night, but distant enough so it's the last place anyone would look. About 3 hours away, I'd say. Maybe somewhere in New Jersey or upstate or Connecticut, perhaps," Ron added. "Yes, that's a possibility. Check the recordings again," Robert said to Demetrius. "Find out if there's been anything unusual, someone who had to skip town, however tangential that may seem." He did, while Ron and Dr. Harrington went back to scouring the internet for news in the target areas. Demetrius came up with new information first. "There hasn't been anything about anyone like our mystery man leaving town. There was one incident that could be related, but I don't think it was. Could be a waste of your time." "Waste my time," Dr. Harrington responded. "There was one story of a young man living in the projects. He had been homeless, but this girl had gotten him a job as a busboy, helped him get his place, etc. He was described as a real loner, though, and no one the Knights feared from the looks of him. Nevertheless, when the Knights attacked this girl, this guy fought like hell. He beat off 3 thugs, all of whom were bigger than him. Then this man, the woman, and her mother all got out of town, but no one knows where." "No one?" Robert asked. "Well, here's the thing," Demetrius replied, scanning his notes. "A heroin addict who gets his drugs from the Knights thought he spotted this guy at a hospital. He told them the guy's license plate in exchange for heroin, but that was it." "That's it?" Dr. Harrington asked. "What do you mean, that's it?" "I mean, they tried to find the guy, but most said they don't remember what happened next," Demetrius replied. "What do you mean they don't remember what happened next?" "What's the last thing they remember specifically?" asked Ron. Demetrius looked down at his notes again. "They headed north on I-95 out of the Bronx," he said. One of the nights said he woke up in bed the next day, sore but clueless about what had happened. What about the drivers? They couldn't have just passed out, Robert said. They just said it was the wrong guy and wouldn't say anything more. So, wasting hours on a wild goose chase gave everyone but the drivers temporary amnesia? Ron asked. I've never heard of that phenomena. Me neither, Robert said, but I'm sure as hell gonna find out the source of it. Joel, Tina, and Rosita walked past the line of Harleys and pickup trucks in the parking lot of the Side Door Cafe, where they headed to celebrate Rosita's quick recovery from meningitis. Hey, Joel, one of the busboys said, can you pick up a shift for me next week? Joel didn't work there much anymore, but would sometimes fill in if helpful. 3 steps later, a husky, middle-aged man with long brown hair and a scraggly beard approached Joel. Hey, good to see you again, he said. I heard you did a great job on Jim's chopper. I didn't even know you did that kind of work. Well, I've been dabbling in it, Joel responded. Man, you're a quick learner. Listen, my engine is making this goddamn grinding noise. First time I took it in, I had to go 30 miles. The guy charged me over $700, and the fucking thing still isn't working right. Could you take a look at it for me? Joel arranged to go see it the next day. They walked into the noisy pub, past a deer head on the wall and popcorn on the floor. As usual, most of the patrons looked similar to the fellow who needed his motorcycle fixed. So, do you think things have cooled off enough to go back home yet? Rosita asked. Home was the South Bronx to Rosita. I heard crime is down by 75%, she followed. Yeah, but I don't think the criminals looking for us are down by 75%, Joel replied with a nervous laugh. Tina gave a weak smile, but Rosita couldn't even manage that. We miss home, Joel, Rosita said. I mean, 2 Puerto Ricans from the Bronx and the backwoods of Connecticut fit in like a Ferris wheel at a cemetery. Joel did laugh at this. That's exactly why this is the last place the Knights would look for us. Where did you come from, Joel? Before the Bronx? Tina asked. Joel thought it was funny that Tina was asking the question now. He was only recently beginning to clearly remember where and how he had grown up. Usually his memory was like a steel trap. At least it was for everything that had happened after his first fight in the Bronx. If you want to see the backwoods, you should see where I grew up, Joel said. It makes Windham County, Connecticut look like a thriving metropolis. Where? Tina asked again. In Alaska, a little bit north of the Arctic Circle, Joel replied. Rosita was taken aback. How did you get by up there? She asked. A lot of fishing, Joel responded. It was an honest, if incomplete, answer. He had done a lot of fishing with his bare hands. The images flickered in his mind, along with memories of catching lunging wolves and planting them headfirst into banks of rivers, pinioning wings of bald eagles with webs from his hands, and even bashing a grizzly bear with a massive floating log to save his salmon. Of course, he hadn't just eaten fish. He had seemed okay eating just about anything, even grass and bark. Joel, he heard as he suddenly snapped back into the present. What do you want? Tina asked him, motioning toward the waitress. Let's see, did you two want to get an appetizer? Joel asked. They both laughed. They never got appetizers, but they knew Joel always wanted one. Go ahead and order your supreme nachos, Tina said. He did, along with a double bacon cheeseburger, and gave a reminder that he would want to see the dessert menu. Tina and Rosita chuckled again. So how did you end up in the Bronx? Rosita asked. I'd like to say it was part of a grand scheme, but it wasn't, Joel answered. I ran into a man from the city. It made me want to explore, find myself, I guess you might say. I wandered through a lot of towns until I figured if I wanted to observe all different kinds of people, maybe find somewhere I could relate to. New York would be a good place to go. All kinds of people there, that's for sure, Tina said. But what do you mean, observe? Were we another one of your science projects? Did I screw it up by talking to you? Tina asked, teasingly. Joel laughed. No, I'm glad. Hey! A voice suddenly interjected. Joel looked up to see a brutish-looking man who stood about 6 feet tall. His big belly partially rested on their table, and his arms were practically bursting out of his flannel shirt. They tensed as he stuck his ruddy face right up to Joel's. Joel could smell the brandy on his breath. "Hey, I'm talking to you," the man said. Joel was at a loss as to how the man could think he wasn't aware of this. "Do you know who I am?" the man asked. By now, most eyes at the tavern were fixed on the confrontation. Joel did not know him. "I'm the guy you just stole that wiring job from in Putnam," the man growled. "It was never my intention to do any harm, sir," Joel responded. "I just spoke with the homeowner, gave him a quote, and he told me to go ahead." "Yeah, your quote undercut us licensed electricians by half or more," the electrician shouted. "And you've been hurting some of my plumbing friends and mechanics. You're all over the fucking place." Joel said in all seriousness, "How much should I be charging, sir?" The large man pounded his fists on Joel's table and shouted, "Don't try being a wise ass with me, you little punk." The force of his fists hitting the table caused the plates to rattle vociferously, sending a chill of silence through the room. "I wasn't trying to be a wise ass, sir," Joel said, "and I have tried 3 times to take the exam to get my electrician's license. The computers were down each time." "That's right, asshole," the bulky electrician responded. "They were down the first 3 times you went, and they're gonna be down the next 3 times after that. Get it?" "I believe you mean that you and a number of other local union electricians have an influence with the licensing agency, and you'd rather I not get my license," Joel responded. "You catch on quick, boy. We don't want you getting your electrician certification, your plumbing certification, or any other certification, and we don't want you cutting into our jobs. I got a family to feed, and there's only so many jobs out here. This ain't exactly New York City. Well, maybe you should start cutting down on your portions, Tubby, and do you and your family some good." The voice was not Joel's. The electrician spun around. The man who had spoken was giving him a cold stare from about 3 feet away. It was Rich, a biker for whom he had recently done some plumbing work and one of the few men in the bar who matched the electrician's size. The electrician started to step toward him but balked when 2 other burly bikers stood up. Turning back to Joel, the electrician said, "I'd get myself a steady desk job if I were you." He walked out and drove off. Rich gave Joel a reassuring look, but they ate the rest of their meal quickly and nervously. Carol wasn't sure why she had been called away from working on the patent filing for Rizon, the drug that was going to all but cure paralysis. She knew that as the pivotal admin for the CEO of NoTech, she had more impact than a lot of executives at competitors that seemed downright sclerotic by comparison. So when she was given Robert's cryptic instructions to look for stories about strange occurrences in rural towns about a 3-hour drive of the Bronx, she knew there was a good reason. It was 7 o'clock at night, and she was about to give up on finding anything when she came across an article about a man in rural Brooklyn, Connecticut, who supposedly slowed a boy's heart rate down to keep him from bleeding to death. There had been a retraction of the story in the paper the next day. The story would have been insignificant to most, but a sixth sense developed during 20 years of working with Robert prompted her to walk into his office. Ron was there with Dr. Harrington. After Carol left, Robert did an internet search. "Well, what do you know?" he said after a couple of minutes. "The police blotters in that area mentioned several apparent unauthorized uses of the labs at East Con, and at least one illegal use of the Yukon labs. No one was ever caught. Was he cooking up hallucinogens there, or stealing animal venom from the biolab?" Ron asked. "I don't know, but it looks like our man may have just moved from the Bronx to Brooklyn after all." Dr. Harrington looked up and said, "Send an agent. The one leading activity in the city could just go up." "Okay, I'll get in touch with Greg," Ron responded. "Yes, do that, but now that I think about it, I think a woman's touch could be useful here. Send Kim as well," Dr. Harrington said. "I'll let Demetrius know to send her. And let Demetrius know he'll be going as well." Robert had finished the inventory of equipment he wanted Kim to bring and was ready to go home for the night. He called down to the front desk to have Tom arrange for the limousine driver to take him home. "Sorry, Dr. Harrington," Tom said on the other line. "The limo's in the shop. There's a problem with the starter. We've been working on getting another one for tonight." "That's okay. Don't bother. I think this old man can still manage to walk a few blocks." He hung up before Tom could protest. He didn't mind that the limousine was out of commission. It was a nice, brisk fall night, and being so close to finding the mysterious benefactor had him feeling flush with victory. He headed out, wrapping his cashmere coat around himself as he went. He lived only 10 blocks away. He had gone 4, and already he had gotten a couple of curious glances. He was just about halfway home when he saw a TV crew filming on the sidewalk. As he passed, he saw that the group of 3 people being filmed were not actors, but participants in some kind of game show. Robert saw now that the contestants were literally licking the sidewalk. One actually seemed to scoop up a couple of small pebbles with his tongue, while another inadvertently licked an old piece of gum, one that had turned brown from all the dirty soles that had stepped on it. All 3 contestants downed a pill of some kind as they stood up again. Each one threw his or her arms into the air with triumphant jubilation. Robert's curiosity impelled him to ask an older man at the edge of the crowd what was happening. "Oh, it's that new game show, To the Edge, where they see which contestant can put up with the most disgusting nonsense. It's like a train wreck. I know I shouldn't be watching, but I can't help it," the man said. "What's the pill they're taking?" Robert asked. But he was able to answer his own question as he saw some pills on a cart they had set up. They were taking Vanquamax. "It's that cure-all pill, supposed to kill just about anything. They seem pretty confident it works," the man said, motioning toward the contestants. "Well, just about anything we've studied so far, but Vanquamax wasn't designed to be wasted on people who are intentionally infecting themselves," Dr. Harrington responded. "Ah, what are you worried about? Doesn't that pill heat up the bad stuff so it all dies?" the old man said. "Besides, folks will do anything to get on TV, especially if there's no talent required." Dr. Harrington moved on, shaking his head as he went. A couple of blocks later, he passed by a McDonald's where people were practically bursting out of the door. It was past peak time for dinner, so his curiosity was stoked again. He stepped inside and spoke to the obese woman who was nearest to him. She was only a couple of feet from the door. "Are they giving away money in here?" Robert asked the woman. "The burgers aren't free," the woman said lightly, "but they're risk-free now that they have that pill that clears out your arteries." "So that's what this is all about," Robert said. "But that's crazy. You don't just have an MI or a stroke because an artery becomes completely occluded with arterial plaque. You could also have an acute thrombosis, plaque rupture, or several other reasons." "Yeah, whatever. Maybe you should tell all them. Help clear out the line," the woman said, motioning toward the rest of those waiting. He didn't. A moment later, his phone rang. Demetrius was on the line. Dr. Harrington had no further information for him except that the man they were looking for would be keeping a low profile, perhaps doing odd jobs, and he had a feeling the man would be unexpectedly good at them. "She sticks out like a sore thumb," Rich thought, as he drank one last beer at the bar. That was despite her flannel shirt, jeans, and skull hat. For one thing, the thick brown hair that poked out from under the hat looked too perfect, and one could tell that her body looked like it was ready for Olympic beach volleyball, despite her relatively loose clothing. She settled her well-toned Latina tush into a stool next to Barry, a young guy who worked nights at a factory in nearby Willimantic, and spent most of his days right on the stool where he sat now. As evinced by his sizable gut, it didn't take Barry long to notice the unfamiliar young lady that had saddled up next to him. "Are you new in town?" he asked her. Well, at least it was a slight variation on "do you come here often?" Rich thought. "Yes, I am, in fact," she replied ebulliently. Rich thought a woman with her looks being enthusiastic about talking with Barry was odd in itself. "In fact," she continued, "I'm staying with my mom for a while. Her health hasn't been too good lately." "Oh, well, that's gotta be stressful," Barry said with sympathy not usually shown toward the chunky barflies that more often ended up next to him. Barry asked her mom's name, but it wasn't a familiar one. Rich was willing to bet Barry had an idea of how to help relieve some of her stress. "It is stressful," she said to Barry. "I'm actually trying to help her with some things while I'm here." "Oh, like what?" Barry asked. "Her car isn't running right. It's making a funny sound and her plumbing is out of whack." "Well, actually, I could take a look at her car for you," Barry said. "Oh, really?" The woman started to reply. "You're not going to be able to fix that car," someone behind Barry interjected, much to his visible chagrin. It was Frank, Barry's buddy, whose slightly slurred but boisterous speech showed that he had been there even longer than Barry. "All you can do is change oil and brake pads," he added. "I can do more than that. You don't know what you're talking about," Barry responded. "Listen, lady," Frank chimed in. There's this new guy in town that can fix anything. This guy, Joel." "Oh, yeah?" she replied. Rich could see her eyes light up. "Yeah. He'd do it cheap, too, but it has to be cash," Frank continued. "That would be fine," she replied. Barry was stewing, but the lady seemed delighted. "Here, let me give you his cell phone. He doesn't have an office or a website or anything. I guess he likes to keep a low profile." Inexplicably, this information seemed to please the lady so far as Rich could tell. He wasn't sure why she'd be glad that Joel might be relatively hard to reach. Nevertheless, Frank gave her the number and she turned to go. Right as she was sliding off of her stool, she turned back and said, "Hey, you know what? I almost forgot to ask about something. Have you heard that story about the guy who lives out in the woods? The one who saved that boy?" Rich had a feeling this was a question she in no way had almost forgotten to ask. Nonetheless, everyone had heard the story she mentioned. Oh, sure," Barry said in answer to her question. "That story was in the paper. That retraction they put in there was bullshit, by the way." The mystery woman did leave, but returned about an hour later with 2 men. Oh, they didn't come in together, nor did the fellows go over to the young woman. But Rich felt confident they were part of the same crew. For one thing, they, like the girl, looked like Olympic athletes. Both were over 6 feet tall and were without the usual belly most of the men that came here sported. One guy was black. He came in wearing a flannel shirt and jeans. But Rich thought the guy would fit in better in a Brooks Brothers suit at a law office. That description would also fit the other fellow. He looked maybe a little older, but was still only in his late 20s at the most. He was white, although his features were dark, with a lupine look about his slender face, especially his piercing eyes. "So, Barry," the woman said as she scooched right up to him again, "I can't go anywhere until I take care of those problems with my mom's house and car, but I couldn't get in touch with that guy, Joel." "Well, Frank gave you his number," Barry said, trying to change the subject. "I know, I called it and I didn't get a response." "Well, it's only been an hour." "I know, but this is urgent. Does he come in here often? Is there a day and time he usually comes in?" she asked. "Well, he used to work here, and he does still cover a shift every once in a while." "Oh, really? Do you think I might be able to find out when he's working next?" "I don't know. You could ask his friend, Tina. She still works here." "Okay, when will she be in next?" "I have no idea. Go ask the manager if you're that curious," Barry said curtly. Rich was no longer the only patron watching the conversation with a mixture of curiosity and resentment. The lady was pushy. "I suppose I could, but that could take a while. Are you sure no one has another number for Joel or some other way to get in touch with him?" she said. Rich had all he could take. "You know, you ask a lot of questions, lady," he blurted out. The young lady spun around to face him. Barry looked over as well, as did everyone else at the pub. He continued anyway. "Are you trying to set Joel up for a beatdown somehow? You know, the last guy who came here looking for trouble with Joel came 1 second away from going out on his ear. And you can go out the same way as far as I'm concerned. And that goes for your 2 pretty boyfriends, too," Rich said, motioning toward the guys that came in with her. The young lady looked baffled. "I'm not trying to set up Joel, sir," she said, conspicuously leaving out the 2 men. "Where are you from, then?" Rich asked angrily. "I'm not looking for any trouble. I was just hoping to employ this young man," she said. "But then you should already know that, since you've been eavesdropping," a voice interjected. Rich looked over to face the man with the lupine features. He tried to size up whether or not he could take him. They were both big, about the same height. Rich was heavier, but only because of his gut. The stranger seemed like the type that would know Fujitsu or some crap, but also the type that would take off if his hair got mussed. "Eavesdropping? She's been ranting on louder than the jukebox," Rich said to the man. "She's not bothering anyone who's minding their own business," the young man replied. "Listen, asshole," Rich said to him. "This whole business of you 3 being here, poking around, asking a whole bunch of questions about Joel, is all you not minding your own business. Hey, look, I'm Greg. That's Demetrius. Let me buy you a drink," the black guy now said. "We're just trying to help Kim recruit Joel for our company. We've heard he's very talented." Rich wasn't as rash as in his younger days, and he was prepared to let it go. All in all, the situation was already settling down, and wouldn't have gone beyond griping if it hadn't been for Maggie Hendricks. Unlike Rich, old Maggie hadn't learned temperance with age, neither with her temper nor her drinking. She had spent some time in Danbury prison for assault, and was still as bellicose as ever. She didn't care much for people she didn't know coming into the pub, especially women who were younger and prettier, and those weren't hard to find. Still, even Rich was surprised to see old Maggie step up on a table and come up behind the inquisitive young lady. "Okay, I'm kicking all your asses out the hard way," she yelled. She leapt toward Kim, but then stopped herself in midair somehow. The crowd had gone quiet. Rich got a better look and finally saw why the crowd had gone silent. Maggie hadn't stopped halfway. She had jumped, and the young lady had caught her with one arm. Kim was now easily holding Maggie over her head with one hand. "That was a mistake," she said to the still suspended Maggie who was struggling to get free. Kim heaved Maggie halfway across the pub, a distance of at least 20 feet as one might throw a beach ball. Maggie came crashing down onto a wooden table, then spilled onto a hardback chair before rolling to the floor. Demetrius jumped up now as chaos broke out. He stepped forward to back up his colleague, only to find a heavy wooden chair coming right at his face. He immediately dropped down into a full split as the chair whizzed by overhead, then jumped high into the air from that position. Before the would-be assailant could recover, Demetrius slammed both of his soles into his chest simultaneously. The husky man was lifted clean off his feet and sent flying back, crashing into 3 other onrushers. Rich's gaze was now captured by the movement of the young black guy, Greg. He too had a chair coming at him with others coming right behind it. His beefy assailant swung violently but missed as the young man ducked and then somersaulted backward as he kicked his assailant under the chin. Greg caught the airborne man and sent him crashing into 4 others. As the assault continued for another minute, the strangers continued using the bar patrons' chairs and broken beer mugs and their own bodies against them. Rich was looking at Greg easily repelling 6 bikers when he found himself grabbed by the front of his shirt and lifted a good 6 inches off the ground. He was face to face with Demetrius. "I'm going to handle this a little differently than Kim," he said. "You're going to tell me where this Joel is." "I don't know," Rich said frantically. "Where's that girl Tina then?" I don't... He saw something out of the corner of his eye. It was Tina. She was at the door with a terrified look on her face. Demetrius put Rich down gently. "Tina," he said to her disarmingly, although the effect was somewhat offset by the aching bodies strewn across the floor. She turned and ran. Kim started after her, but Demetrius held her back. "Give it a minute," he said. Tina burst through the doors of the East Con library, ignoring the dirty look she was getting. "Joel! Joel!" she shouted. She searched frantically through the library. He said he would be here, but she had no idea where. She ran to the study section, but all she saw was about a dozen college kids working at the tables. "Tina!" she heard a voice say. She turned around to see the same woman and men she had seen at the pub. "Who are you? What do you want?" she asked. "Tina, it's okay. Calm down," Demetrius said. "We want to help Joel. We just need to know where he is." "Tina." She spun around to see Joel, standing a few feet away. "Joel, what's going on? Who are these people? Do you know them?" "Leave, Tina." "No, what's..." "Joel," Demetrius said to Joel calmly. "I'm Demetrius. These are my colleagues, Greg and Kim. We'd like you to come with us. Dr. Harrington would very much like to meet you." "That's not what I want. That's not going to happen," Joel replied. "I'm sorry you feel that way. I'm afraid we aren't allowed to accept that answer," Demetrius said. The 3 pulled out tranquilizer guns. Tina's mouth went agape as she saw Joel instantaneously sprout 3 octopus arms and knock the guns out of their hands, out through the large window to his left. "Get out of here, now!" Joel growled at Tina. She did, and the dozen or so other patrons in the library scrambled to leave as well. "Get the guns!" Demetrius shouted to his cohorts. Without hesitation, they ran straight for the windows and shattered the glass as they sailed through them simultaneously like trained acrobats. "Go home," Joel simply said to Demetrius as he turned to walk away. He made no special note of the fact that the full bookshelves he passed were about 8 feet high, 2 feet deep, and 15 feet wide. That was until he saw one of them being swung right at his face with hellacious speed. Joel could only cushion the crushing blow with his arm. The back of the metal shelf hit him with enough force to flatten a normal man. But the agonizing wallop didn't keep Joel from responding immediately. He morphed his left arm into the likeness of an electric eel. 500 volts of energy pumped through the jaws of the eel protrusion. Joel turned back to see convulsions send Demetrius flying back 15 feet into the wall behind him with a loud thud. Before he could even catch his breath, Joel dodged 2 pinpoint accurate tranquilizer darts Greg had aimed at him. Joel could see the surprise on the young man's face as Greg traversed the distance between them in a split second. He reached out to hold Joel still while stabbing at him with a dart. He morphed into a giant yellow poison arrow tree frog. The usually tiny frog had skin so poisonous that one touch of it could kill an elephant. Joel took advantage of Greg's split-second hesitation, grabbing him with his enormous frog tongue and sending him 20 feet headfirst into the cinder block wall to his right, smashing through it like paper mache. Like a bat, Joel's ear picked up the sound of a whistling dart heading right for his back. He whipped around as his huge, outstretched tongue became an elephant trunk. He knocked the dart away with it, then charged Kim as he completed his transformation into an African elephant. He knocked away another dart as Kim dove to his side. It was too late. Joel snatched her up with his trunk and squeezed, but not before she was able to grab the flap of one of his humongous ears, pull herself up to Joel's elephant face, and jab her fingers with superhuman strength into his eyes, pushing them back through their sockets. Joel's pain was terrible as he stood on his gigantic hind legs and sent Kim smashing through the ceiling. As he did so, however, the weight of his elephant body plunged him through the floor as the edifice groaned and collapsed. His eyes being disabled, Joel generated a forked snake tongue, ideal for smelling the direction of oncoming threats, then fully changed his head into that of a spitting cobra. This all took only a couple of moments, but the transformation was barely complete when he could sense Kim sticking her head into the gaping hole in the ceiling. He sprayed venom with a lightning twitch over 15 feet upward as Kim fired a dart all but simultaneously. Kim's yell told him he had hit his mark on her face, even as he barely dodged her dead-shot barb. Pressing his advantage, Joel transformed his body into a kangaroo, with the cobra head remaining, leaping upward a whole level and then some in microseconds, then planting his feet squarely into the gut of an equally blinded Kim, sending her sailing backwards. Her back made a deep crater in the wall that sent up a shower of debris. Joel's feet hadn't touched the floor when, with his regenerated eyes, he found himself suspended none too gently by the throat by Greg. Joel tried to spray, but Greg clamped his jaw shut with his other hand. Morphing into something bigger or smaller could cause Greg to crush his windpipe. Joel, instead, shed the snakeskin covering his head and neck, oozing out a slimy slug coating for good measure, and slipped away, leaving Greg holding an empty husk. Joel changed back to human form as the sound of falling books reverberated off the mangled shelves. He stood to face Greg, which is why he didn't see or hear Kim sprinting toward him. The kick to the side of his head sent him right through the concrete wall behind him at rocket speed. Joel emerged back through the hole, his face flushed with rage. Kim bade Joel come forward with a curved finger. He did. Joel charged at her in human form, then morphed into a triceratops. The entire floor strained under his massive bulk as he rumbled toward her with surprising speed. She fired off 2 shots while running backward, but Joel twisted his head just enough for the darts to bounce off his bony armor. He saw her crouching down as if preparing to spring, but before she could, he changed into a leaping, spinning armadillo, hitting her right under the chin with his heavily armored body. His suddenly decreased mass as he leapt slingshotted him into her. She was out cold as she sailed through the window behind her and into the courtyard 20 feet below, landing flat on her back. Joel jumped to his feet and surveyed the destruction in front of him. The shelves on either side of him had been knocked down, and books were strewn scattershot across the floor. He stepped forward and looked to see what had become of Greg, then looked up and behind him to see him, leaping down off a shelf, dart in hand. Joel instinctively raised his left hand, which now turned into a monstrous anglerfish. Joel turned its naturally glowing stalk up to spotlight brightness, then walloped a blinded Greg's jaw with what was now the clubbed tail of an ankylosaurus, sending him out through the upper section of the nearest library wall. Joel never heard the 100-pound file cabinet coming at his back at breakneck speed. He was literally impaled through his back and out through his chest as one of the sharp top corners of the massive object impacted first. He was laid out instantly. "Shit!" Joel heard Demetrius exclaim as he clung to consciousness. "Oh God, I've killed him!" Demetrius said. He moved aside the heavy file cabinet like it was an empty shoebox, then rolled Joel over onto his back, seeing now the gaping hole where his heart used to be. Before Demetrius's shocked eyes, Joel's shredded heart began to regenerate. First the aorta and the ventricles self-repaired. Then the sternum melded together again. Finally, the skin sealed itself up as if it had never been damaged. "Nice trick," Demetrius said, then immediately raised his gun to fire. He was too late. He had been shot first. He looked down to see 3 sharp barbs sticking into his skin. He followed the barbs back to Joel's right hand, which now sported thick, fleshy tendrils, the organic harpoons of a sea anemone. Joel pumped poison into him before he could react. A normal man would have been immediately incapacitated by the barbs. Instead, Demetrius, despite already looking a little woozy, grabbed the fleshy tethers, yanked on the extended limbs, and then with a violent twist of his trunk, sent Joel headlong into the wall behind him. He could feel Demetrius running toward him faster than a drag racer with several darts in hand. He got within 5 feet of Joel, raised his arm, and ran into a thicket of porcupine quills. He had seen them, but only when his momentum was too much to overcome. They pierced his body through his stomach, legs, and left arm. It was all he could do to keep the quills away from his vital organs. Blood poured from the wounds as Demetrius grimaced. Nevertheless, neither of the young men hesitated. Demetrius pulled the spikes from his body forcefully, despite knowing that this would tear his flesh even more. Joel immediately morphed into a normal-sized housefly, using its small dimensions and sensitivity to the slightest disturbance in the air to make his escape. Demetrius smashed his darts over the quills, spilling the potent sedative onto each member of the quartet of spikes. Joel saw daylight through the hole Kim's flying body had made on the other side of the library. His elation at his coming escape was replaced by dread, as he felt the vibrations caused by 4 precisely thrown quills. He managed to dodge 3. His comatose human body fell 15 feet down to the floor below in a crashing heap. Only eyes astute as those of Demetrius could see the nick caused by the quill that had grazed him. He had injected Joel with enough tranquilizer to bring down a supersaurus, and then he collapsed himself. Tina had left the library and moved to the top of a hill looking down on it. Her terror had been mixed with fascination, and she had stayed within view despite the obvious danger. Neither she nor the other dozen or so patrons and passers-by had been disappointed. They had heard loud, rumbling, animalistic cries that belonged no place in Connecticut. Bodies smashed up through the library roof and sailed out through its walls only to pop right up and leap back into the building with superhuman speed. The chaos had taken only a couple of minutes. The police were on their way, but unbeknownst to Tina and the other onlookers, someone else had been aware of the struggle. That someone had stationed an unmarked black helicopter at the nearest heliport, which had left for the library at top speed at the first sign the tracking devices on Demetrius, Greg, and Kim indicated trouble. The helicopter landed on the library roof, and soon after, a man stepped out. Like the others, he was tall and muscular. He looked to be Latino. He was dressed in a simple black uniform, something like an unmarked SWAT team outfit. Tina saw him jump right through the hole, at least a 20-foot drop. Jorge's scanning equipment had shown that the activity inside the library had ceased, but he was wary nonetheless. The library looked like an F5 tornado had come through, multi-ton bookshelves thrown about like so many matchbox cars, splayed about at odd angles, books, desks, and chairs strewn about the floor along with a bloody file cabinet, and SUV-sized holes in every wall. He saw Demetrius lying on the floor, comatose with 4 large bloody wounds, although the holes had already started to close up and heal. The pilot also saw a stranger who he assumed was their target. He was passed out but seemed to be stirring. Jorge immediately picked up the young man, jumped up the 20 feet to the library roof as a normal man might step onto a curb, and put him in the helicopter. Just as the stranger's eyes were starting to open, the pilot put a needle into his arm, sedating him again. The needle was connected to a tank holding gallons of the powerful tranquilizer. He had all 3 of his colleagues in the chopper within a minute, Kim having been found on top of a bush outside, Greg simply on the grass, though all of them needed the smelling salts from the helicopter's first aid kit. "Just keep an eye on him," Jorge said. "There needs to be a constant intravenous flow of the sedative going into him." It had been less than 5 minutes since the confrontation had begun. They were all awake, but groggy, except for the stranger as they lifted off. Below them, they could see police cruisers pulling into the library parking lot with sirens blaring. Demetrius, despite the state they were all in, picked up the radio as they took off. "Sir, we've got him," Demetrius said. "Is he sedated? Is the tank set up?" the voice on the other end said. Jorge recognized it as that of Dr. Harrington himself. Demetrius related the story of how they had captured this Joel to Dr. Harrington, who intermittently broke in with questions that showed his rapt interest. Demetrius confirmed that Joel had indeed been able to seemingly transform into animals, or the parts of them that he needed. He also said that based on where he lived and the stories from the bar, he was almost certainly the same man who had healed the boy. "Wait," Dr. Harrington said suddenly. "I know who he is. My God, I know who he is." "Who?" Demetrius asked. "Who is he? What is he?" Demetrius did not get any answers. Instead, Dr. Harrington said, "Let him go. He'll come to me on his own. I know that now." "Sir, are you sure about that?" Demetrius asked, miffed. "Do you know what we just went through because he didn't want to come meet you?" "Yes, I'm sure. He will come to me, and it's better if he comes on his own. Now pull that needle from his arm and let him go." "I don't think—" Demetrius started to respond. He stopped when he saw Greg take out the needle. "No!" Joel heard Demetrius shout as his needle was removed. It still felt as though he had lead weights on his eyelids, and he could hear Demetrius yelling for the needle to be put back in. He shut down the effects of the drug, then got an idea. "What the hell are you doing?" Demetrius yelled at Greg. The pilot was shocked to see that Joel was already lucid. "Hold him still!" Demetrius yelled. Kim reached over a visibly ambivalent Greg as Demetrius held the needle furtively. Kim jerked her hands back as she saw that Joel had morphed into a small yellow octopus with blue spots. It was the blue ring octopus with a bite that contained enough poison to kill 26 men. It was also boneless. Joel used his tentacled arms to pull himself into the front seat, then threw his octopus body at one of the climate control vents. In this invertebrate form, Joel was able to squeeze his body through the gaps in the vent, a trick that required no genetic enhancement of the octopus's abilities. The helicopter gave chase, but he morphed into a peregrine falcon that dove down toward the Hartford skyline below at over 150 miles per hour. "He's sure in a hurry to get somewhere," Kim said, as the helicopter veered off toward the nearby heliport. Joel smelled the first open dumpster outside an Italian restaurant from about 500 feet up, and saw it a couple of seconds later. He slammed into a half-eaten serving of chicken marsala and began to eat ravenously. He shut down his receptor for smell, but the experience was still an unpleasant reminder of his lifestyle from just last year. Now, back to human form. He had finished enough half and three-quarter portions to add up to about 6 full ones. Suddenly he heard a sound continuously undulating in pitch. Next, he saw a light that went back and forth from visible to infrared to ultraviolet, along with other wavelengths along the electromagnetic spectrum, varying unpredictably. He also felt an oscillating buzz on his skin and tongue. The changing vibrations were fundamentally hard to focus in on and make sense of, but he intuitively felt they constituted a message. Genetically enhancing and then variously focusing his different senses, Joel started to make out a message. "I," he now heard repeating itself intermittently. Eventually he saw the word "are" flickering in the sky, then felt the shape of the word "who" buzzing on his skin. Next, at significantly different wavelengths, he could hear the word "no" with his tongue. He adjusted the sensing abilities of his external organs in a similar fashion so he would see the word "you" with his finger. He thought he had figured out all the words in the message now, but it was obviously scrambled. What was it? "I are who know you." It was a senseless non sequitur. He was almost out of the alleyway when it came to him. "I know who you are." A message delivered that no one, no thing, could have figured out but him. Sent by someone with a unique understanding of his abilities. Joel morphed into a hawk and headed to Manhattan. Joel arrived at the headquarters of No-Tech the next morning in human form, wearing fleshy patches as an imperceptible verisimilitude of clothing, khakis and a navy blue golf shirt, in this case. He found quite a scene before he even entered the door. A group of about 20 protesters were picketing in front of the main entrance. "No-Tech fosters fornication," one sign read. "Bob orchestrates obesity," read another. Joel put his curiosity over the protesters aside for a moment and looked up at the building he was about to enter. It had an all-glass exterior and stood about 400 feet in height, while taking up a city block. A pyramid shape that crowned the building added to the structure's look of understated gravitas. As Joel walked toward the entrance, a protester stuffed a fact sheet into his hand. Joel glanced down at the handout as he walked through the automatically revolving doors. Some of the lines read, "One-night stands in New York City up 32% since the launch of Vanquimax. So-called miracle anti-infective not helpful for most AIDS patients. Obesity rises 24% nationwide since the launch of Dissolva." He read this last line as he approached the security desk. The lobby was bright and airy with beige marble on the floor and walls. Clocks, showing the times in a dozen cities around the world, sat behind the 20-something uniformed guard whose name tag said Tom, and who now looked up. "Can I help you?" Tom asked him. "Yes, I'm here to see Dr. Robert Harrington," Joel said. "You mean the CEO?" the guard asked. "Yes." "He only sees people by appointment. Do you have an appointment for today?" "Well, he just called me." "Hang on a minute," the guard said. "Hi, Carol, I'm sorry to bother you. It's Tom at the front desk. I don't suppose Dr. Harrington just called anyone and asked them to drop by?" "No, that's not the good doctor's style," Joel could hear Carol reply. "Didn't think so. Sorry to bother you." "Not at all," she said, hanging up. "Well, it looks like there's been some kind of mix-up." "No, I don't think so," Joel replied. "Could you check again?" "Hell, if it's any comfort, you got closer than most wackos off the street. In fact, I'll probably catch shit for even calling up about you. Now, turn around. The door's that way." The guard wouldn't even look up again. Joel turned around and out. He had put his hand on the revolving door when he heard the guard shout his name. "Joel?" the guard said. "Is your name Joel?" Joel turned back around and nodded at the visibly shocked guard. "Yes, Dr. Harrington does want to see you. Please, come back." Joel did and received a pass from the guard. "Hey, one quick question," the guard asked as he walked Joel to the elevator. "What's that?" "So, what are you?" Joel was taken aback. How much information had Dr. Harrington given this guard? I mean, like, are you white, black, Pacific Islander or something? "Not quite sure myself," Joel replied simply. "Maybe I'm about to find out." Joel was often asked questions about his human ethnicity. He also found that based on the amount of melanin in his skin, some expected him to act a certain way or speak a certain way. He found it all a little silly. Humans were one of the planet's least diverse species, having been pared down to as few as 1,000 individuals as recently as 70,000 years ago after the mega-colossal explosion of Toba in Indonesia and its after-effects. Further breaking down people into ethnicities and races seemed redundant to him. The guard showed him the elevator for the executive floors and opened it using a special key. He seemed to be giving Joel curious glances as he stepped through the doors and then pressed the button for the 42nd floor. Joel stepped off onto the top floor and headed to the office directly at the end of the hall in front of him. There were no cubicles here, not even for the assistants. Just about all the offices looked bigger inside than his 1,000-square-foot house. Some of the people he passed looked him up and down with a look of mild puzzlement, others with a practiced, professional detachment. The smell of leather and solid cherry filled his nose. Exact words were hard for even Joel to pick up among the mishmash of conversations, but their tones were moderate and measured. Joel saw names on all the doors, but the ones in the huge offices toward the end of the hall came with titles that looked familiar to him. Chief Financial Officer, read one. Chief Operating Officer, read another. Both were adjoined by separate offices for their assistants, as was the office closest to the end of the hall on his left, which held a plaque reading, Ron Guerin, Head Counsel. The door to this office was open, and Joel could see a man of about 40 sitting at the desk. He had thick, sandy blonde hair and blue eyes. He wore a dark suit with bold stripes. The man nodded and smiled politely, with a glimmer of genuine, if restrained, excitement. Joel turned back to the large double doors in front of him. Dr. Robert Harrington, Ph.D., Chief Executive Officer, the placard read. He gave a light knock and twisted the handle. It was locked. He turned to his right to see a proper-looking woman of about 60 with gray hair. "Joel?" she asked. "Yes?" he replied. "One moment." She picked up her phone. "Dr. Harrington, Joel is here," she said. "Thank you, Carol," Joel could hear on the other end of the line. The lock snapped open. "Carol?" "Yes?" she said. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm very hungry. Is there any chance some food could be brought up? I'm not picky. Oh, certainly. I'll call and have it delivered. Thank you, Joel said. He opened the door and stepped inside. Dr. Harrington sat behind his desk. A fit man of about 50, his gaze followed Joel intently. He gestured for Joel to take a seat in a sculpted leather chair. Welcome home, Joel, he said cryptically. Joel walked past the conference table in the massive office and took a seat in front of the desk. I'm from Alaska, Joel replied. No tech, Joel, the CEO said. No tech is your home. Why did you attack me then? Do you know who I am? How did you send that message? Where's my family? Dr. Harrington raised his hand, not unkindly, and spoke reassuringly. There are many questions about you, my friend. Some I will answer for you now. Some you will need to answer for me. And some we must answer together. Let's start with why I was attacked. I think that's one you'll need to answer for me. Dr. Harrington shrugged. Things got out of hand. Demetrius, especially, got overzealous. But it was critical that we met. It's the only way you can take the next step. The only way you can reach your full potential. And if it's any comfort, anyone or anything else in the world would have been taken down in 3 seconds by my agents. Why do you care if I reach my full potential? Joel asked. Because you reaching your full potential is the only way no tech can realize its full potential, an event that can make it the greatest force for good the world has ever known. So, what is my full potential? Who am I? What am I? Dr. Harrington paused. You are a mistake. You are also my greatest invention, and you might someday be the ultimate fulfillment of what a person can be, he said. Perhaps you've already unlocked the full extent of your abilities, but I suspect you've only tapped into a fraction of them. You designed me? Joel said, looking down. Why don't you know what my abilities are then? Wasn't it you who gave them to me? My dear friend, Dr. Harrington responded. I didn't give you anything you didn't already have. Ron shut the door to his office and pulled out his personal cell phone. George, he said, he's here. Their meeting's begun. Yes, of course I bugged the room. He doesn't look like anything special. Now, George, I haven't decided to give you any information at all. I'm just keeping my options open. Passing secrets along to our biggest rival is not something I take lightly. Think of a number with a lot of zeros at the end. In the meantime, I'll say hello to your old MIT chum, Robert, for you. A tray with a plate of pizza along with fried chicken and fries arrived for Joel. He moved to the conference table to eat, where Dr. Harrington joined him. What do you mean you didn't give me anything I didn't already have? Joel asked between bites. You just said you made me. Everything I am is because of you. To explain who you are and how you developed, it's first necessary to understand how I engineered the folks you met yesterday. As you may have guessed, they were my goal, Dr. Harrington replied. Okay then, since you want to start with them, where did they come from? Were they just cooked up in a lab? No. For what it's worth, all of them had a biological parent. Parent? Singular? Yes, effectively. I came across a study in which an ovum was made to divide and form a blastocyst, the beginning stages of an embryo, without fertilization, a phenomenon known as parthogenesis, like with Komodo dragons, and hammerhead sharks, among many other animals. So they came from unfertilized ovums, which you then cloned, perhaps? No. Getting a large number of women to donate their eggs was impractical, and I didn't want creepily identical clones. There was an easier way if I could manage a small adjustment. Men. It would be easier if you got the DNA from men, Joel said. So where did the ovums come from? They couldn't come from thin air. Hardly. But it was one ovum and one X chromosome. And just those were cloned many times. Whose ovum? A woman our enemies thought they had rendered impotent forever. Instead, they will find it was she who created the vessel that carried and nurtured the seed of their imminent end. Joel had read enough about Dr. Harrington to surmise whom he meant. You mean your wife? The one the primes killed years ago? You saved one of her ovums? Dr. Harrington nodded. A gut decision. I wasn't even sure why at the time. But that decision was pivotal. So, is she my mother? I wouldn't put it that way. The cloned ovums were enucleated, except for half, where all but the X chromosome stayed to create a female. Otherwise, the entire genetic profile came from that easier and cheaper source known as men. What men? Men I paid $20 a piece for their samples starting 20 years ago, all from different men, to prevent any carbon copies. $20? Joel said, hanging his head. My dad sold me for $20. Do not insult yourself, Joel. He was not your father. He was a sperm donor, nothing more. Do not intimate that he can take credit for you. Who was my father? Joel asked. Who were all these men? They were the kind of men that would accept $20 to cut all ties with their offspring, and do so without asking questions. The homeless, the addicted, degenerates of all kinds, with a few broke college kids in the mix. How many of these men did you find? Joel asked. 5,000. My God, Joel said. A force of 5,000 like the ones I face today? A force for good, Joel. But we're far from being a bunch of clones of homeless men, Joel said. Yes, of course, that's the real question here. Not how did I grow people in a lab, but how did I grow people like you, like them in a lab? I can tell you it wasn't easy. There were, of course, many characteristics I wanted you and your cohorts to have. Attempting to manipulate genes to achieve even one characteristic is an extremely complicated process. A given trait may be influenced by 20 different genes, or a single gene may influence 20 different traits. Tweak a gene one way, and the unintended consequences can be legion. No, manipulating genes one by one to achieve desired characteristics would have been a Sisyphean task. You didn't give up, though? Dr. Harrington chuckled. No, indeed not. Perhaps I would have, until I got a little inspiration from a naturally occurring hormone, which retards muscle growth. A hormone that retards muscle growth? Joel asked incredulously. Yes, a hormone by the name of myostatin was discovered several years ago. A researcher found that by deleting the gene that produced myostatin, he produced muscular mice, which led to his discovery of a young boy in Germany, born without the gene to produce myostatin, who had the physique of an adult bodybuilder and was several times stronger than a normal boy his age. So why even have such a hormone if people and animals are stronger without it? We'll get to that, Dr. Harrington responded. First and foremost, I was learning the hard way that designing these children the way I wanted from the bottom up was going to be a long and frustrating process. I knew it would be much easier if I could design them in a top-down fashion, if I could signal the characteristics I wanted and let the embryos take care of the details, much the way evolving species adapt to their environment. Now, wait a minute, Joel said. You're talking about Lamarckian evolution, an organism adapting to its environment within one generation, like a giraffe's neck becoming longer to reach high leaves. It's been proven wrong. It doesn't happen. The giraffes would have to adapt by having the ones with longer necks survive, while the others died off. It's Darwinian evolution, survival of the fittest. Yes, well, as is so often the case with biology, that answer is not so cut and dry. After all, what is genetic change? When a man lifts weights and makes his muscles stronger, he actually does damage to his muscles. Then the body perceives the need to reconstruct the muscles bigger and stronger, and initiates a change in genetic expression from the nucleus to repair the muscles. Is that a genetic change? Yes and no, I guess, Joel replied. There are a lot of yes and no's when it comes to genetics and evolution. Take a look at giraffes again. For example, what if they could change the length of their necks in one lifetime? It wouldn't prove they were rearranging their genes. Changing the length of their necks could just be an ability they always had, It would arguably be less of a change than a chameleon changing its skin. In fact, trees do grow continuously throughout their lifetimes toward their food source, namely light, due to a chemical they produce called indole-3 acetic acid, better known as auxin. But you're talking about plants, an entirely different kingdom, fundamentally different from animals. So, an animal can't have abilities more typical of plants? Why not? Because we're fundamentally different. For example, I would assume an animal can't perform photosynthesis. I mean, Dr. Harrington pounded his fist on the table. Don't assume, Joel. I know, Joel replied, raising his hands apologetically. It's lazy. Don't be lazy. The world can't afford it. If... Dr. Harrington put his head down and smiled, calming himself down. Forgive the outburst of a crotchety old man. In fact, there is an animal that uses photosynthesis. The green sea slug does indeed produce chlorophyll and utilizes photosynthesis, turning light into food, albeit as a supplement to the food it eats. Well, maybe so, Joel replied, a little exasperated. But there are certain things that are just genetically fixed for most organisms, including people. Dr. Harrington sat back in his chair and smiled. Oh? Like what? Joel thought for a minute. Well, like one's sex, one's brain cells at adulthood, and, of course, no one had the ability to physically recombine one's genes in a purposeful manner. Until I came along, of course. Dr. Harrington shook his head. Wrong, wrong, and wrong, he replied. There are many organisms that can change their sex if it makes it easier to mate, including oysters and several kinds of fish. Really? Joel asked. Indeed, and experiments have shown that canaries, amongst many other animals, can regenerate their brain cells. An ability we lost somewhere along the line, Joel replied. Dr. Harrington nodded. But my truly unique ability, physically recombining my genes, is not unique either. Something I confirmed after much study, for this was the most important question to me as it is to you. If changing just about any facet of an organism within a lifetime can be a genetic ability, why couldn't an organism be born with a genetic ability to rearrange its genes? And then I found examples of just such an ability. With an amoeba or something? Dr. Harrington shook his head. I'm talking about all of us, Joel. Or rather, the antibody-producing cells we all have. Well, of course they shut down harmful pathogens, but... Dr. Harrington nodded. Literally billions of pathogens. These antibodies work not by consuming pathogens, but rather by binding to the antigens on these pathogens, rendering them inert. As you know, binding to the receptors of a given pathogen requires a precise fit on the part of the antibody. Researchers always found this puzzling, because every pathogen and its receptors are different, so shutting down billions of pathogens requires billions of different antibodies. It was always a mystery how the body was able to enable such variability. It turns out that our B cells, our lymphocytes that produce these varied antibodies, actually recombine their genes while we are in the womb, allowing for over 1 trillion unique B cells in the body, each one latching onto pathogens differently. When an invading pathogen latches onto the right B cell, the immune system targets that pathogen for destruction, and countless antibody facsimiles are then generated, deactivating the other invading cells. That's very interesting. All of these unexpected abilities are interesting. Still, we are limited genetically in many ways. It's one thing that there are certain abilities we've never had, but clearly there are extremely useful abilities our ancestors had that we've now lost. Why would that be? Dr. Harrington smiled and rubbed his chin, then responded by saying, Have you gotten enough to eat? While looking at the 4 empty plates on the tray in front of the young man.